Hey guys, my name is Carson. Welcome to my garage. So I hate to say it, I kind of already started this project. I've had it in my mind for a while, and I've just been slowly collecting parts to get it done. And I started kind of getting into it and realized I had a little bit more thinking to do, so I had to sit on it and think about it. But it's just the beginning. I figured I was doing a lot of research, and there isn't really a lot of people. There's people out here that are doing it, but there's not really a lot of people that are out here telling you how to do it. So I figured I'd give the rundown here. So I am working on my X-pro Vader 125cc China Grom that I have dubbed the Chom. It's a nice little unit. It runs and rides pretty good. The only thing I've done is got a Grom Tose exhaust, put it on there, made it sound a lot better. I did a bigger front sprocket, give it a little bit more top end speed, and then you won't be able to really see it right now, but I switched over to a VM22 Mikuni style carburetor. So the biggest issue that these bikes have is the carburetors. The guy who owned it before me said that he was out riding it and the fuel bowl literally fell off and it was riveted on, so he had to tap the holes for the bowl and put some new hardware in there. And the factory carburetors are just really restricted, so you don't really get as much power out of it. So I ended up switching over to that other carburetor, that VM22 Mikuni style carburetor. I have used the carburetor on other things before, so I was kind of familiar with it, and that's what I decided to go with. It's pretty cheap. You can find them on Amazon. I can't remember exactly. I want to say it's around $100 for a pit bike kit. But I decided, just me being me, that I had to mess with it more, and a 190cc bigger engine, big bore engine with a 5-speed first popped into my mind, but it was a little bit too pricey for me. So I went with the cheap route, which turned out not to be the so cheap route, and I decided to put a little turbo on it. What we have here is a VZ21 style turbo. I can't remember what, it's an RHB31. I can't remember what the exact thing is, so I apologize if I'm wrong. But basically, it's turbo, and what I plan to do with it is I plan to do a draw-through setup with it, not a blow-through, draw-through. So the carburetor is going to be on the front of the turbo, and the air fuel is going to be going through the turbo. In order to do that, so another thing not a lot of people really talk about, in order to do that, you have to put a carbon seal in there. So what a carbon seal does is it's basically an oil seal for the turbo that seals the oil from going or from air going into the center section of the turbo into the oil, but it also keeps the oil from going out into the compressor housing, so you don't end up burning a bunch of oil. The reason you have to do that is with your throttle body or a carburetor on the front of the turbo, turbos aren't designed to basically have vacuum in the compressor housing. So when you're on the throttle and you're hitting boost and you're ripping, and then you let off the throttle, your compressor housing gets a vacuum in it instead of boost in there. So with a traditional oil seal, the oil will actually get sucked through the center section into the compressor housing, and then you'll end up with a bunch of oil going through your engine. So the other thing I'm going to talk about is your oil supply and drain for these little pit bike motors. I call it a pit bike motor. I know it's a road bike, but pit bikes and pretty much every Chinese 125cc engine is all the same. So you can find a lot of parts for pit bikes and not so many listed under the Vader name. So what you have to do, or what I decided to do, is you take this plate off of the side of the engine, which on the Vader and most pit bikes is going to be on the side here. So this is just a block off plate. All this does is when you take it off and you look at it, you have an oil pressure that comes into here and it redirects the oil and goes into the cam, so it actually lubricates your cam bearings. But you take these and you buy a plate for an oil cooler. So with an oil cooler setup, you would have a plate, then your feed would come from here. There wouldn't be a channel that goes in between the two here, and it would just be basically a banjo bolt comes out, and then you'd have an oil line going to wherever your respective oil cooler is, and then you'd have a line coming back from the oil cooler and coming into here, and then there's a channel that brings it back over to here. So what you do is you take this oil cooler. What I decided to do is you take this oil cooler plate, and I put a -4 AN fitting in here, and you can see usually there wouldn't be a groove in here. It would just have this groove basically for the return. The return would come in on the top side, and then it would come back down and then feed your cam. But I'm not going to use this return just basically because of physical constraints. The return would be way too close to my drain right here to really do anything with, and especially with me wanting to use AN line, that ain't gonna work. So I block that off, and when you block your return line off, or your return port off, you have to use, you have to put a port in here. And I drilled a little hole in the end, just like the way that the aftermarket part comes. I put a groove in here, drilled a hole in there, so it still lubricates your cam bearing. And then what I'm gonna do for my return, so this is the feed. This is just gonna have an AN line come out, come up over the bike, or over the turbo, and then up into this fitting, which then comes into the top of the turbo. And that's gonna be my oil feed. For the return, the turbo return is up underneath here. Sorry, you can't really see it very well. I took that, and I bought just a generic oil drain for that. It comes with like I think it's like a 3/4 or 5/8 hose barb at the end of it. I took it, I cut the end off of it, and I bought a weldable steel -6 AN fitting. And I cut the end off of it, and I welded on the end of that. Don't judge my welds too much. I'm getting into TIG welding, and this metal was not very good. It was zinc coated and started kind of bubbling up, and not very nice to me while I was trying to weld it. But welded that up good, and that's just going to bolt onto the bottom of the turbo here, and that will allow me to put a AN line on that. And I still have to build the lines, but this is just a 90-degree fitting for them. And then for the return back into the engine, I couldn't really use that oil cooler return plate just due to physical constraints. I'm sure if you mounted the turbo in a different area, you'd be fine. Originally, I thought I would be fine. I wanted to mount the turbo off more to the right side. So the turbo was kind of hanging out there for everybody to see, but I decided against it. It'd be too far out. The exhaust would be right by my leg, and carburetor would be too far out. It just looked goofy to me. So I decided to put it on the bottom here, which this is the intake elbow that came with the aftermarket carburetor that I have on it. I just had to drill these holes out a little bit more. I'm not super proud of the fitment right here. But hopefully I can get that to seal up fine under boost. It's not going to be running too much boost, maybe 10-15 pounds. We'll see. I'm not sure if I'm going to use the wastegate yet, so it might just make as much boost as it wants to. So I decided to put this little spacer in here originally because I was going to use the return on this plate. So I tried to lift the turbo up just a little bit to give me a little bit more real estate, but I ended up going against that. But I think I might leave this spacer in there. It still gives me a little bit of real estate for what I'm going to do with the oil return. So onto that, like I said, the flange is going to be on the bottom of the turbo, and then the front of the engine has a couple options for me. There's this top access right up here to adjust your valves, basically is what it is. And then there is this front plate, which is to get to your head bolts and stuff. It's basically your valve cover on a car. The underside has a little spot to adjust your valves as well. And what I decided to do is take that off, drill a hole in it, and put my other -6 fitting in there as my return. So that is going to be up underneath here. And then the oil line is going to come from the bottom of the turbo here and run down here, and that will go back into the crankcase. So that is your oiling system for one of these. So I just got the plate put back on the engine, the fitting put on the bottom of the turbo, and I got the AN fittings kind of mocked up. I didn't get the lines made yet. That's probably going to be in the next part, but it's getting a little bit too late tonight for me to do that. So this is how it is mocked up. You can see that plates on there. You have to use button head screws in here, or socket head screws. Normal bolts, the ones that the engine comes with. These guys are just a little bit too big to sink down in there like that, let alone you wouldn't really be able to get a socket on this. So I had to grab some screws there. I told myself I'd kind of do it right, but I didn't really see any other choice. I kind of knew what I wanted to do, so I decided this plug, I put some JB Weld on there. It's just a bolt that's cut down, and I had to trim a little bit of the head or the flange away there to fit that socket or that socket head screw in there. And then this is just a Vibrant, as you can see, a Vibrant Performance. They got pretty much just everything you want as far as exhaust tubing, AN lines, fluid, delivery. Can't remember what else they make. They make a lot more. But these are the two main things I'm going to use from them. I got a lot of exhaust tubing to get the hot side made up, and then I got a lot for the cold side too, but I ended up just using this. I may or may not make my own, not 100% sure yet, but also a little bit of tubing to make an adapter to go from the turbo to the carburetor. But yeah, I put these fittings on here to kind of show you the routing that I'm going to use. So this is just a 90-degree swivel head. You can see this swivels independently of this, so you can kind of orient it however you want. It's easier to fit up, but it's probably going to be somewhere around here, going up and over up into this line right here. So as you can see, they're pretty close. Should work out pretty good. This is where it gets a little bit tricky. Like I said, I had some proximity and physical constraint issues with this, and that's why I didn't use this oil return. But instead, I decided to go with a return down here. Makes gravity feeding a little bit easier. Hopefully it should drain out better. I know it's kind of below and that the oil has to flow up, but there's a good 6 inches here that hopefully the oil will kind of gravity feed its way back up into there. And this shouldn't be full of oil. I'm sure there's going to be a little bit of oil that pools up here, but it's not like oil's all the way up here, so it shouldn't drain back down into there. Hopefully I do not have oil backup issues in the turbo. But I think there isn't really a good way for me to route this that's not going to go out here into the forks or into the tire. So I think my easiest way to do this is to have the hose kind of come out and loop back around into here. If anything, I can kind of have this fitting pointed more that way instead of up this way to kind of just keep the loop up and over here. I have a lot of room on this side. Obviously nothing's really going to be on that side, but I'd like to have it about as short as possible to keep oil from backing up into the turbo. So yeah, that's as far as I'm going to get for the night. So it's another day back in the garage, going to work on the turbo bike again. We're going to try to get them oil lines made up and fit it up right. So I got some Vibrant -6 AN line, some -4 AN line, and then I have their jaws for the vise to hold the fittings while you're making the line. Then I also have their line wrenches too. I don't know if I need 2 of each or just the 1 of each if I have the vise yet, but if I need to, I can make do with just a an adjustable wrench. So I'm probably going to start off with making the drain line, which is going to end up being a -6 line. It's still small, but it's one size bigger than the feed line, hopefully, so then we have a little bit higher pressure going into the turbo and then lower pressure but higher flow going into the return. So the way that I'm going to try to run this line is I'm going to have it start off at this fitting, obviously, and then probably, I don't know how tight I'm going to be able to make this radius, but I'm probably just going to have it end up something like that. So I'm going to try to make this line in a way where it doesn't end up kind of inherently coming upwards, because that will kind of restrict the flow in this area of the return line, and I don't want any oil pooling up in this area causing this turbo to burn more oil. So I'm going to try to make it as tight as I can without it going up like that, which may or may not be okay, may or may not be difficult. I'm not 100% sure yet. Hopefully it doesn't end up sticking too far out this way where it looks kind of goofy. So the way that these lines are made up is you have this collar, which actually threads on to the fitting like this. But you take that collar off, and then you have to press it onto the end of this line, so it ends up looking something like that. And then with it in the vise, I'll bring you over there in a second, you kind of have to lube this up, or it's easier to lube it up, and then you shove it inside of here. This end ends up going inside of the hose here, and then you thread this collar onto here, and it ends up spreading the line out in a way where it seals up. I'm probably going to end up just connecting one end up first and then kind of figuring out where this bottom end has to go. So I got this collar put on the end of this line. It's hard to see because it's black on black, but you'll see the hose kind of butt up. There's a little ledge in here about this far, and you want that hose to butt up in there. And I didn't mention the reason why I'm using these block clamps is these being aluminum, if you put them in the steel, they're going to get marred up really easy, and these are the same softness of aluminum, coated the same type, so they're not really, one isn't really going to tend to scratch the other, and just makes it a lot easier to hold in there because it's cut out right and it won't scratch it up. Another thing I forgot to mention as I get this put into the vise is that typically you're going to want to use the same brand fitting as you do line. The lines and the fitting sizes might vary from brand to brand just a little bit. I've heard of people having issues with one brand fitting with another brand line. They don't just fit up quite right and they end up causing leaks. Since this is in the vise now, you can take the other end of your fitting, which has this barb in here and it's threaded up here. Depending on the size of line, this size of line is pretty easy to thread in there, but you might have to really push down in here to get this tip into the end of the rubber before it actually starts to thread in. This one tends to thread in pretty good, 6 AN. At least with these vibrant ones, doesn't seem to be too picky. But you just keep threading her in. You want to make sure that the line isn't kind of getting pushed out of the bottom here as you thread in. You don't want to be threading this and have this line push out of the bottom here, and then you just have a weak seal. So you kind of want to watch it the entire time, but you're going to turn it in. You don't want that to end up spinning, so you might have to actually hold this and use two hands to get this tightened. But let me get this fitting made up and we'll get back. So just got this fitting all made up. You can see that the fitting and the collar are kind of butted up pretty close together. You want that to get as tight as you can. You want to be sure not to strip it out, as both of the collar and the fitting body is aluminum, so it's going to strip out pretty easy. Definitely recommend putting a dab of oil on here. It just goes on there a lot easier. This doesn't tend to spin as much, and you can get a good proper torque on there without the resistance of the line itself getting on there. I did realize while doing this that these vibrant fittings, this one's a swivel end fitting, but I noticed that this part and this part, which is 6 AN wrench that I got, are just slightly different sizes. So the 6AN wrench isn't going to work when making up these fittings, but this one for a 6AN ended up being a 3/4 size, and if you're just real gentle with it, you'll tend not to scratch it up. You can watch yourself, be gentle, or you can just go all willy-nilly if you don't care about the finish. But that's all that those wrenches are really for. But just a quick note, the 6AN wrench is only going to work on the fitting side, not actually when you're making up the line. So I got the line back put on the turbo, and then I got this fitting put back on here. And as I'm mocking it up, you can see this will probably work out pretty all right. Doesn't look like it's going to kink here. It doesn't look like it's trying to tear out the end here or push up too far. The only thing I'm worried about is that I might have to poke it out just a little bit more so there isn't an immediate curve coming up here. That could cause this fitting to line here to wear a little bit prematurely and cause a leak later down the road. But I don't think that if it's fitted up like this, I don't think that is too bad of a length. It doesn't shoot out way too far over here. It doesn't look goofy. It doesn't come upward. So I think I'm probably going to run it like this. The only thing you got to make sure of is when you're measuring to get these lines cut, you have to account for that these fittings the line has to go into these fittings a little bit. It's not a terrible amount. I mean, it's probably from here to here. So you're just going to want to allow yourself another 1/4 to a 1/2 inch of play on a bigger vehicle or something else that you're using. 1/4 to a 1/2 inch, you're really not going to worry about it too much. But this being such a small build and stuff, I don't really have that much room to compromise. A 1/4 inch too short could really screw me, and a 1/4 inch too long could look a little bit goofy. So I'm going to try to get as precise as I can. I have a little bit of white electrical tape that I'm going to try to mark it out with, and that way I can cut it. Okay, so I got it all kind of measured out. I use this white electrical tape and kind of just butted it up to about here. I think that the edge of this tape will kind of show me how far this line is going to go into the fitting. And that looks like a pretty good angle if need be. I can kind of tilt it up and out more. I can put it down a little bit more to kind of make it fit better. So we're going to take this line back off and we're going to start cutting it. So when you're cutting these, there's a couple things to remember. First thing is that it isn't just rubber and whatever this is wrapped in. There's actually a little bit of metal in here, so you can't just cut it with something made for soft wire or just soft rubber hose. You can use an angle grinder I've heard of, or if you have a bandsaw like me, you can use that. The other thing is you're going to want to cut it pretty straight. So the cleaner the cut you have, the better seal that you're going to have when making this. And you also want to make sure that you don't get too much debris inside the line, or if you're conscious of it, then you want to make sure you clean this out before actually installing it on whatever you're using it for. So let me get this cut and we'll get right back. So here it is after it's cut. You can see that bandsaw. I believe I have a 24 TPI blade on that, so it's going to cut a little bit finer. But it left a pretty good clean cut on there. It's fairly straight. I tried to follow my masking line the best I could. Another thing I forgot to mention is that whether or not you're using electrical tape or something to mark this out with, I do recommend wrapping it in something. That way when you're cutting it and there's a lot of air going around or something kind of hitting it, it doesn't try to unweave this cover that's on the outside of here. So this electrical tape actually helped it stay in position and not get too frayed up. So now I'll get that collar put on there, I'll get the line made up, and hopefully if I did this all right, it'll fit on the bike. And there we go. There's my finished AN line. Got both of them ends on there. I actually end up going back and trying to fit up these two mating surfaces between the collar and the actual threaded body on both of these. Because why not? I'm here. Let's do it. Let's make it look good. Okay, let's get it put on the bike, see if it fits. Okay, there's the line fit up on the bike. Doesn't look too bad if I do say so myself. I don't think it's going to stick out too far where it's going to hit this. And if need be, I can try to tuck it back in there a little bit more. But this feels like where it kind of wants to be, is right about there. You can see the level of this top isn't really shooting up, which I hoped it would stay mostly flat. So that looks good. It all seems to fit up pretty good. It doesn't feel like there's any kinking here. It doesn't feel like this is shooting up at an angle that's going to damage it in any sort of way. I'm sure once it gets warm, it's going to kind of settle in a little bit better too. But there's the drain line made. Now onto the feed line. So I figured I'd show you at least one of these fittings from start to finish, or at least mostly from start to finish. So I got the collar put on this line. I'm not sure if you can see it very well, but the line's inside of this vise that I've got the jaws on here. Got it all butted up, ready to go. You just take this fitting, and it turns out the dash 4 is the same way, where your dash 4 AN wrench isn't necessarily going to fit on this threaded part very well. I find a 5/8 wrench fits on this threaded part just fine, so I'm going to use that. Just be gentle with it as not to mess up the finish if you want it to look good. So I just got a little bit of oil in the squirter here. I'm just going to put a little bit of oil on this. A little dab will do ya. Don't need to get crazy with it. Kind of spread it around. Clean your fingers off so you're not all dirty. And get it started in here. These vibrant ones seem to be pretty nice to you. You don't really have to push super hard down in order to get the thread started, which is good. I've had a couple. I use these, at least these style fittings at work, not necessarily vibrant and not usually AN lines, but these kind of push and then thread in to lock it in the collar kind of fittings. I don't know exactly what they're called, but I use them for fuel lines sometimes at work, and I know the ones that we use at work, you really got to push down on. So these are really nice that you don't have to put too much pressure on them. So now that this is in here, you just grab your 5/8 wrench, hold your line at the bottom here. Don't want it to twist too much. It'll actually kind of, as you're twisting, if this turns, it'll kind of push itself out with it. So I like to grab it and just put some upward pressure in there. Make sure it's not coming out, and just thread this in. With that oil in there, it really helps this thing thread in there good without much resistance at all. Towards the end, you might start to get some resistance. You might start to feel that line turn on you a little bit. But like I said, if you keep the upward pressure and you keep it from spinning, it should be fine. I'm not sure if you can see it because, again, black on black. This threaded portion is coming in to the collar and button up there. That's where you want it. You don't want a big gap there. You want it to thread all the way in. And I like to get it threaded all the way in. You don't want to crank it on it too much because it's aluminum, but just get those flats lined up. Don't need to go crazy with it. Just give it a little bit of pressure until those flats line up. You don't have to do that. I just like to do it because, again, we're here, we're doing it. This is the time to do it. Make it look good. So that right there is a finished end. You can see this is butted up there perfectly. The line ain't going nowhere. It didn't press its way out or spin its way out. And I got those flats lined up good. So it's looking good. Hopefully it seals good. We won't know until we get the bike on the road. So let's get it measured and let's get the other side made. So this is the best angle I got as me being new to filming, but I might as well show you how to cut it too, or at least how I cut it with the bandsaw. Bear with me, it's gonna get loud. So I did my best to get a good, clean, straight cut. I got it straight, but not so clean. The line ended up kind of fraying on me a little bit, but we can work with that. If need be, and the weave kind of gets in your way, you can just take a razor blade or something and kind of trim the edges off of it so they don't fold over when you're putting the collar on there. But that's how I cut my AN lines, and I do think a bandsaw is the easiest way to do it. So I got the other line made up. A little disappointed in myself, I guess. My wrench ended up kind of slipping off of here, and I got just the smallest nick in this line. It's a small line. I don't think many people are going to notice it. I don't really like my builds being too perfect anyways. Just makes me kind of anxious about them as not to ruin it. So I got the first little ding out of the way. So I'm ready to move on. Let's get this line put on, make sure it fits up right. Quick couple final thoughts on this while I'm fitting this up. These AN lines, pretty comprehensive, really easy to use. They went together super smooth, really easy to cut. I really like them a lot. I feel like I'm going to be using them on some of my other builds if I end up keep doing this kind of stuff. Let me know if you guys would do it any different. I was thinking about using hard line like brake line to get these put together and kind of bending them up all pretty, but I ended up just going with the soft line. Felt like it'd be easier. But if I do say so myself, I think it turned out pretty good. The feed line is nice tucked up in there. Doesn't look like it's going to snag on anything. The oil return line, pretty good, I believe. With the physical constraints, it's not in the way. Doesn't look like it's going to get caught on anything going down the road. Not too far out. Nothing's kinked. Should flow good enough. Before you start one of these engines with a brand new turbo, especially a small turbo like this, it is a Chinese branded turbo. Nothing fancy. I did have it worked on by a G-Pop shop, or I can't remember what their site is. I think it's carbonsealturbos.com. But they're real quick and easy, but it is still a Chinese brand turbo. The bearings aren't very good. Who knows if it's been broken in. I believe G-Pop shop actually did run the center housing and make sure that everything's balanced. So it's been, I think this one's been run before, but if you're just using an out-of-the-box turbo, or I guess with any turbo, pre-fill your turbo before you run it. Put some drops of oil in there. Make sure it's all lubed up. That way your first startup with your brand new turbo isn't dry. And then your turbo will be good to run. Before I run it, I'm going to pop the bottom of my return line off, or the top of my return line off. Just make sure I'm getting a good constant oil flow going in here. The turbo is cheap, but the work to get done wasn't exactly as cheap. So I kind of like to keep this one alive. But there you go. If you're wondering how to oil one of these, if you're putting a turbo on an engine like this, or putting a turbo on any engine, hopefully this gave you a little bit of insight. I was having a hard time finding anything technical on this, on how to do it. I've heard people turbo these engines before, but they didn't really give me a good rundown on how to go about it. They didn't really tell you how to run the oil lines, where you got to get your oil pressure from, stuff like that. But hopefully this works. You'll see in a future video after I get the intake all finished up and the exhaust all finished up, and we'll get it started, if the oiling system actually works or if I have to redo it in a different way. Another thing I kind of realized that I could do is, instead of going down here, I could run it over, cut a couple fittings off of up here and use it, or even down here and kind of put it down. That way you can kind of see the angle. The oil is going to have to go up just a little bit to get back in here, but I think the gravity should help it come out of there just fine. But we'll make sure of that before I finalize this and get it started. So that's it. This is my first video I'm doing. I'm probably going to end up doing an entire series about this bike. Figured I'd break it up a little bit so I don't bore you. If you're not looking for oil information, if you're looking for exhaust information, there'll probably be a video about that. If you're looking on how to tune it or how it rides, there'll probably be videos about that too. But this is the first one. I really wanted to get that oil system knocked out of the way, make sure that I could do it, make sure that it wasn't too tight in there for me to do it. And I think it turned out really well. I'm sorry if I bored you a little bit. I try to get a little technical with what I'm doing. I notice a lot of people will explain what they're doing, not really get super in depth with it, show you or do a time lapse of them doing it, but not explain how to do it, why they're doing it, and you know, explain some of the thought process through it. So I'm sorry if I bored you with some of the technical stuff, but I'm doing it to try to help out a couple people who are into, or just getting into working on stuff and don't quite understand stuff as well as most people. And with this bike, like I said, I could not find a lot of information out there on how to do it, so I kind of had to figure it all out myself. So up next, I'm probably going to tackle the exhaust. I got a bunch of stainless for it, going to be TIGging it. That'll be in a different video. This one was just about oiling and get that first video pressed out. I've got a lot of plans for this bike, and I'm probably going to start making videos on my other projects I got here in the garage. I hope this video helped a couple people who are looking into doing this kind of thing. Hopefully it entertained a couple people, and hopefully I could teach you a thing or two about making AN lines and getting the turbo system oiled up.